Welcome to the Mies Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into.
My guest today is the very inspiring chef Eli Kulp. Man, we had a really awesome conversation. Eli's the co-founder and culinary director of High Street Hospitality Group and the host of two incredible podcasts, one called Chef Radio and the other one called Delicious City, Philly. He lives in Philly, but he spent a lot of time cooking in New York at spots like Del Posto and for the Major Food Group. He's a James Beard Award nominee. He's won Food and Wine's Best New Chef. He won Chef of the Year from both Eater and Philadelphia Enquirer, and generally speaking, just a really awesome, talented chef, great leader, and restaurateur. What's more, in 2015, Eli was left paralyzed from a spinal cord injury from a tragic Amtrak accident. This type of tragedy would devastate really anyone, and of course, Eli went through an immense amount of pain and struggle, and like anyone, found it really hard to push forward. But he did, and he's doing more than ever now, hosting podcasts, maintaining his role with the award-winning restaurant group, and generally speaking, just inspiring chefs and people of all walks of life. Tragedies like the one that Eli suffered completely change our perspective and force us to be grateful for things that maybe otherwise we wouldn't have. And in the words of Eli, don't wait for a tragedy to frame your perspective or to find gratefulness in your life. I love this episode. I love chatting with Eli, and I think you will too. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Eli, I think a lot of people already know you, but maybe just a little background on, coming up in the food industry, how you started, and then how you got to these two podcasts.
So my story starts like a lot of people, just needed some income. When I was a teenager, I wanted a dirt bike. I grew up riding dirt bikes. I wanted a new one. So my dad naturally was like, let's get a job for you. And it just happened at the time that this lady had moved into this small town. I grew up in Washington State. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, kind of in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, really beautiful lakes, rivers, just a perfect childhood, roaming the trees and prairies and everything. So just constantly outdoors exploring, but dirt bikes, all that. So it's just a big part of my childhood. And this lady moved into town, wanted to open this little restaurant. The story is pretty hilarious. So this town is, I jokingly say hillbillies and rednecks, but it's kind of, there's some truth to it.
Wait, what's the difference? I forget between a hillbilly and a redneck.
Hillbilly and redneck. I think a hillbilly is just more up in the hills and they have them there. Like they don't come down much. They come down for provisions and they head back up and they hermit away. There's definitely places like that up in like the Winston Creek area where you're like, how do these people live? You're like, you never see them, but they're isolated. They're isolated people. And, it's not like the Beverly Hillbillies and stuff. And then rednecks, of course, is just, shooting shit. Anything that moves, we always had rifles in our car, and anything that moved was a target. And yeah, we'd roam around at nighttime with spotlights looking for eyes, and like, it's just what we did. I think people look at small towns a lot of times, are like, what the hell do they do there? I tell you what, though, it's just getting into like fun trouble. That's all it is. Whether it's tearing down road signs and just doing silly, dumb things to fill up our time. But this woman had moved into the town and she wanted to open this restaurant. And my dad was like, well, go ask for a job washing dishes or something. So she made me a busser / dishwasher. My uniform was black pants, white shirt, and Irish green cummerbund and bow tie.
Obviously.
And yeah, I mean, in a small little town of, and, during the summer, it would get a lot of tourism and we have a lot of lakes and parks and stuff like that. So
how old were you when you started?
14. Yeah. So I was 14 when I started. And then really quickly I gravitated towards the kitchen and I did some cooking and I got, sucked into that. And I stayed there all through high school. And it was one of those things where I'm hanging out with adults, I'm 15 years old. I'm hanging out with like industry veterans of guys with tattoos and, they've been cooking this place and that place. And these chefs that kind of just like move around and work at crappy places, it's like it supplies their drugs essentially, is what I can surmise now later on what was going on there. But it really exposed me to this whole other side of culture. And I really fell in love with that idea. And as soon as I graduated, I moved down to Portland did a culinary school down there and just started working. And before you know it, I'm up in Seattle. I did 4 years up in Seattle. And then I sort of got away from real cooking. I was working at like an Irish pub company, and which was great because it was a corporate company, and I learned a ton about food costs, labor costs, management, scheduling, all these things that a lot of chefs don't ever learn until they're thrust into a sous chef role or thrust into a CDC role, where all of a sudden now you have to do dollars and cents before all you're doing is throwing stuff in a pan and cooking it. So I feel very fortunate, even though I was 25 when I moved to New York and really started digging deep into cooking. I went to the CIA. I didn't have the confidence just to go from an Irish pub in Seattle right to New York City and start cooking. But I knew I wanted to go to New York City. Kitchen Confidential was a huge influence on me making that decision. My brother bought me the book and I read it and I was like, this is what I have to do. And I always wanted to go to the East Coast. I was thinking Boston or New York or something like that. Just kind of live that lifestyle a little bit. And so I packed up my Azusa rodeo and drove across country, enrolled at the CIA and spent considerable time just researching New York City and researching food. And there's tons of young kids go to CIA, right? Were you one of those? You went pretty young?
I went when I was 17 to Johnson and Wales.
Exactly. Okay. So so you know how it is. Like these kids don't even know what they really want to do. And I was 25, so I took it really serious. I really dug in and made the most of it and did my externship in New York at Oceana with Cornelius Gallagher, which was just an eye-opening experience. I mean, he had just come off working as a exec sous at Danielle. He worked for Greg Kunz at Les Panas. So he had this incredible repertoire, and he was a ninja in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Like he really was.
I left just when he got there, actually. So we must have just crossed paths.
Oh, were you with Rick Moonen?
I was with Rick, and
okay.
Rick left, and Mike Schenk stepped in for a little bit.
Oh, that's cool.
In between, and then when Neil got there, and then I ended up going to John George. But yeah, we must have just crossed paths.
It's funny. A lot of people were in that kitchen. I hear that a lot with chefs. I left there a couple months before you. So it was definitely a kitchen that was well known. And, if you want to learn seafood cooking, fishery, and really dive into that, it was a fantastic learning experience for me. But I also learned really important little lessons. I remember we did this kohlrabi. It was like a warm, cold soup situation. We had kohlrabi it was butternut squash soup on the bottom in a shot glass, and then like a kohlrabi puree on the top. And, the bottom was warm, the top was cold. And I had to polish these shot glasses, right? Well, I did that, but Neil came over one time and either he made this up. Like I looked at it afterwards. I was like, there's no damn spot on that glass, but he lit me up, man. He lit me up hard. And even though I think he just was probably just fucking with me, it immediately created an eye for detail that I didn't have before. Where you're looking at every little thing possible.
Yeah.
The way your towel's folded on your station. That was a big one for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it still is today for me. I feel like there's immense amount of wisdom, I think, in a folded towel on your station at all times.
100%.
And just keeping everything at 90-degree angles and just keeping an organized station. And when I left Oceana, I was prepared for the next thing because nothing could have put more pressure on me than Oceana and what Neil did. And I left there, and eventually, as an extern, you do your boost station, but he took a liking to me after a while. He saw that I was dedicated and I was serious, and I had a chance to work with the Saucier team for the last couple months of my time there, and just dove into it. Both feet in, loved it, loved the atmosphere, even though it was crazy and a little bit psychotic at times. I excelled in it, and from there, I worked for a couple French kitchens, so BLT Fish, Laurent Torrendale when that first opened. And again, a really high pressure, French-driven kitchen, brigade system, all that. And then I worked for, do you know Josh Tekelis? Do you remember Josh Tekelis from Soumele?
Yeah, Soumele, yeah.
Yeah, I worked with Josh at Soumele, a little Japanese spot in the West Village. And then he opened up this Italian restaurant on the Upper East Side called Jovia.
Yep.
Evan Rich was there. You probably remember Evan being there.
I remember that for sure.
Yeah, so it was this townhouse on the Upper East Side, like 63rd and Lex, between Lex and Park. And it was by all intents and purposes, a really energized kitchen. There was a lot of really good cooks there. Peter Serpico was there. Evan Rich was there. Ended up being Aaron Silverman, now Rose's Luxury down in DC. It was, even though it was a small kitchen, a lot of really talented chefs came out of that kitchen. But the problem was is that Josh DeKellis had been basically working at Union Pacific for a while and then also at Sumile. So he's really focused on Asian ingredients for a long time. And when he met with the owners and they decided to do an Italian restaurant, he's a talented cook, like super talented on the stove, right? Just like some of his concepts, though, are a little difficult to produce over and over and consistent.
A lot of steps, right?
A lot of steps, really, really intricate things during a busy service where it wasn't a 3 Michelin star restaurant. So you didn't have 4 guys on a station producing 1 or 2 items. You had a busy station with a lot of mise en place. I tell this story a lot, but this kind of sums it up. There's a couple dishes that Josh did that were just totally impossible to reproduce consistently, like during service. And one of them was, like when you do like a crispy skin on a fish, right? Like a snapper or black bass. In this case, it was black bass. You either expect the skin to shrink a little bit or you give it some slits, right? And, so the skin doesn't shrink up as much. His answer to that was start the fillet of fish in a cold pan with a little bit of oil, put the cold pan on the stove. You're cooking the fish entirely on the skin side, go in and out of the oven a little bit. But the key is as soon as that fish, the flesh of the fish was 95% perfect, then you put it over high heat to release the skin from the pan. And you're working on French tops, right? So you don't have like a burner and, so the idea, it was beautiful because the skin didn't shrink. It literally stuck to the pan. So the skin was expansive over the entire fillet. But the problem was that's impossible to do consistently over and over on a busy service. I mean, you're doing 120 covers, and it was just a train wreck of a kitchen. It was madhouse. It was a madhouse. So after that, that's when I met Mario Carbone, and he was helping us with some pasta recipes. His girlfriend worked there at the time, and Del Posto had just opened. So, I was talking to Mario. I was really interested in Del Posto and maybe learning something other than like a French kitchen. And so I went to Del Posto, and that's really where I fell in love with this idea of cooking more soulful food rather than cooking with your heart more in your head, and I learned that, okay, a kitchen doesn't have to be complete chaos. It doesn't have to be sabotage mentality of, angry cooks at other angry cooks. And it was like walking into like a Zen kitchen. Everybody had to do their job. It was a high expectation, but at the time, Mario Batali, say what you want about him, but the culture that he had and Mark Ladner had in the kitchen was way more laid back, right? They didn't subscribe to this high-end French mentality to get the job done. They relied more on the relationships to get the job done. So that was really a turning point for my career, going to Del Posto and spending almost 3 years there and learning like you don't have to cook food angry. And I always say like you can't cook good Italian food angry. You just can't.
Yeah. There's so many nuggets that we learn in these kitchens that sort of cross boundaries to other things in life. So many of them that I think Josh is an incredibly talented chef, but it's a perfect example of if you can't consistently execute something, it doesn't matter how innovative it is. That's universal to any industry, right? You have to sort of match
no doubt, right?
Execution with the innovation. If they don't, then you're going to have to wait, right? You're going to have to wait until you're able to do more, get the new stove in, have people that want to pay more for the food. And I feel like chefs sort of go through phases early on in your career. You're just learning, right? You're learning every technique. You got first the basics, and you learn a brunoise, and then you learn mother sauces, and then you learn, some like how to actually work with a pan and the heat and things like that. And then you start to learn like maybe developing your own flavors. But I think every chef goes through that phase where you want to sort of impress and you want to sort of start to, show all the techniques that you know. And it's really hard because you've learned all these things and you're probably really good at them. And so you're like, okay, now I want to show everybody. And you almost have to go through that phase, right? The key is, can you get out of that phase? Because you have to go through that phase with getting that stuff out of you, of like being able to sort of get out of your system. I just need to go and release all these new techniques and test them out. But then you have to sort of graduate to this phase of, okay, now I need to step back and say, is the juice worth the squeeze? What does the end result actually need to be? And does this technique actually need to happen for that?
And does it fit into my lifestyle now? All of a sudden you're not 25, 28 years old anymore.
Yeah.
You're 35 and now you want to spend time with the family, or you want to be able to go on trips or vacations. And if you have to be there during every service and, stick your foot up every ass to get what you want every day, that's exhausting, and it's not sustainable. And this restaurant I'm talking about with Jovia, for example, it wasn't sustainable. It got completely obliterated. Frank Bruni had just come off, 7 years in Rome or something. He just took the, the critic role in New York for the New York Times. And here we were presenting an Italian restaurant that was like Asian influenced, he just wrecked it. Like, it was like 1-star review. I remember sitting in the stairwell reading that, everybody printed it out on paper, right? So everybody could read it. And I was like, oh God, this is not going well. This is not where I need to be. And that's, for me, fortunately, I landed on my feet in a great spot. And, those relationships I built at Del Posto still exist today. And it's great to see all the people from that kitchen at Del Posto and also Jovia, like, people that are really standout chefs that, that you sort of your comrades with,
Yeah.
So it's cool.
You can't replace that camaraderie you get when you're in the trenches with, working those crazy hours and crazy days. And, obviously the other learning lesson is you got to set your cooks up for success. And that just didn't happen back then. It didn't matter. It's like, look, you got 12 9-pan pickups and this is just what it is. So you're going to have to come in at 9 a.m. to set up your station and you're not clocking in. Yep. And that's just how this job works. I mean, we loved it, right? Because we got to just do all kinds of cool things. But ultimately, it doesn't work as a business model at scale because eventually everyone breaks.
Well, no, I mean, the business model was borderline slavery, in the sense that they're paying you, they don't own you. So I don't want to misconstrue that. But, you're making like $6 an hour if you do the math.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you're living in New York City and somehow you have to figure it out. Like you said, the stations that you were on, it didn't matter if, I think a BLT fish station, when I was on the starch station, I do potatoes, and every starch, I had like 8 different pickups of potatoes and different starches. And that's a heavy station. I would be there at 9:30 a.m. in the morning, just trying to just get to it. And eventually, you carve off your hours a little bit, and eventually you're coming in at, a little bit later or whatnot. But in the beginning, it's a proving ground and something that I think for the future of our industry, I don't think that it has to be like that to be successful, what we were exposed to. I do think there is something to be said, though, for leaders today, chefs in kitchens, that we still need to take the approach that we're a mentor. We have to push people beyond their perceived limits in order for them to achieve what they can achieve. And I think that's what these kitchens did, is that when you started that station, you felt it was impossible, right? You were always behind. You're always getting middle service, your palm souffle wouldn't souffle, and you're struggling, and, you're crashing service because they need that palm souffle at the table. But then you learn, okay, well, the potato, maybe it was too ripe, the sugar content, finding the right potatoes. You pick up on all these little nuanced particular things about what makes a potato, right? And you learn that it does change, the sugar content does change, and that does affect the browning and also the souffle. So you're working through these really difficult equations, and what seems impossible is possible. But at the time when you're a 22-year-old cook or 23-year-old cook and you're struggling, like, yeah, that's anxiety provoking, that's stressful, that's all these things. The beauty of it is that once you get through it, you now have an immense amount of confidence for the next challenge. And today, there's still going to be challenging kitchens out there. There's chefs that are very ambitious. There's still cooks that really want to work. But I think in general, the lack of pressure that we can apply today, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. We don't know if that's going to create spoiled chefs. Is the industry going to shit because of it? Probably not, because we'll evolve, but it's still sometimes hard to wrap your mind around. Okay, so, the business model used to operate, you could get your kitchen labor down to 15%. Well, now kitchen labor is 28%, not including management. So now where does that money come from? Right. That's the age old question. Is it the menu increase? Do you cut costs? that's the challenge. And that's a very big challenge today. And the restaurant industry you're not going to make what you used to make 15, 20 years ago. If you have a restaurant, you're going to make about a quarter of that if you're lucky.
Yeah. We do this sort of exercise of looking back, and it was this way. And, we worked 6 days in a double and we got paid a shift pay. And we look back on that and say that was the good way. And I think a lot of it was, there's obviously so much of that was intrinsic, right? We wanted to do that. It wasn't someone pushing us. There was never someone said, you have to come in. It sounds like we started in New York at the same time. You came in on your day off to learn butchery. You came in early to learn how to bake. You stayed late so that you could get with the saucier to see how he's crashing sauces or whatever the things that you wanted to learn. You just did that because you wanted to absorb everything. And you knew that the person next to you was doing the same. And if you wanted to be good, you had to. And I think there was something beautiful about that. That said, I think it would be naive of us to say that the new generation isn't like that, or that because it's different, because they're not working as many hours, or because they're not being pushed the same way, that it will change. Maybe they'll be even more innovative. Who knows? Maybe they'll be more motivated.
Well, technology is also helping that, right? So just look at what's available in the market for ovens, for example. You look at like the Unox ovens they're so high tech that you're able to do things in these ovens that we could never have even dreamt of. Technology blending with the craft, who knows what's going to happen? And it's all about reducing labor costs, right? That's the number one for all these companies out there. It's all about reducing the need for manpower because we know that it's inconsistent. And getting back to what you're saying about like the time spent, just like, a Japanese knife maker, just like a high-end carpenter, just like, a sculptor, like these are crafts, right? These are what we do as a craft, and we're craftspeople. I'm not talking about like cutting out paper with your kid crafts, but we're craftsmen, we're craftswomen. And, that just takes repetition. That's all there is to it. The more you put in, the more you're going to get out. And that's it. We're not sitting at a trading desk watching the stock market and trading stocks. And maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't, maybe you're better at it, maybe you're not. But it's out of your control in reality, where your career as a cook is completely in your control at all times. So I tell people, young cooks especially, don't worry about the pay. The pay will come. Don't worry about the hours. Consider that learning. You're not putting in hours. You're actually, if you reverse engineer that, you're just educating yourself more. And that's all it is. Maybe people are like, oh, well, the restaurants are taking advantage of it and look at this horrible industry, took advantage of so many people over the years. And yes, there's definitely areas that we fell short, but we also inherited a broken system. So our generation of chefs, mine and yours, we're this transition generation. We were the last ones to kind of deal with shift pay and the highly abusive or intense kitchens, depending on how you look at it. And then we crossed over into this, now we're operating restaurants because our generation is now the owners. We're now the chefs. We're now, the ones operating. We're the restaurateurs. And now we're dealing with something that's totally foreign to us. And that's where finding other ways to get what the final product that you want and being able to teach that is really the goal, I think, as any chef today. Because the number one thing that's keeping me from opening a restaurant, or a lot of people opening another restaurant, is labor, right? It's where are you going to find the people? And if you can't find the people, what are you going to do? I remember there's a restaurant group here in Philadelphia during the pandemic. They were offering $2,500 bonus, I think it was, sign-on bonus, like cash. Like, you apply here, or you get hired here, we're going to give you $2,500. And what does that do for the industry? Like, every other owner is like, wait, whoa, you're changing the rules here, and now we have to like keep up with that. So when you see a moment of evolution like that happening so quickly, and our industry evolved since 2020 so quickly, there's going to be collateral damage. There's going to be areas that we're not going to get right out of the gate. But with time, finding that new stride is really the goal. The owners, the restaurateurs that can do that the quickest are going to be the ones that are most successful. The caveat is, how do you maintain the principles that you have How do you maintain the expectations you have, but do it in a way that the employee has much more power and say than they did 5 years ago, because you desperately are trying to hold on to them. So people are bending, they're allowing their principles, they're allowing their expectations to be lowered just to maintain a staff. Whether that's your front of the house, like, okay, all right, fine, no uniforms, have all the piercings you want, be your own personality, just so we can maintain you as a server. Where, okay, well, now the tables aren't getting bussed the same. People aren't, the service is tables are messy. These are just things I'm seeing and noticing that would not have flied 5-6 years ago in some restaurants, because you can't criticize, you can't, bring up every little detail that they're missing, because they're like, well, I'll just go somewhere else. I'll make just as much and I won't have to deal with it.
I do think that, first of all, I don't think it'll ever work if all we're doing is trying to acquiesce to more demands and pay more. I think that what's the interesting sort of paradigm here is that if you really want someone to stay, the way that we sort of grew up in kitchens, and the way it still sort of is that you spend a year or 2 years. Maybe you spend 3 years, but that doesn't happen very often, right? Because then you go to the next thing, right? We've all done, right? We go to Oceana, or then John George, and then Boulay, and then Tabla, or you go to Del Posto, and then you go to, and you do that for quite a while, right? And I guess one question I ask myself is, can we set up a restaurant where a cook would want to stay here for 10 years? Could we give them enough to learn and to grow into, where they see that, like, oh yeah, this is a job and a career that I could actually spend the next 10 years for. You are going to have to pay them more. You are going to have benefits. But, when you know that someone's going to be there for 5, 6, 7 years, and that's just the expectation, maybe it's 5 years, that's 10 years could be a long time. There's a different mindset, and it goes for cooks and for front of the house. But it means that we also, we need to be able to provide a lot of infrastructure in terms of education, in terms of things that you can learn, different stations you can do, different things that you can sort of dig into, and maybe not even just cooking.
Creating the visible upward mobility, right? So people can see, okay, if I stay here and I put the time in, I'm going to be rewarded. And what you see now, a lot of restaurant groups are giving equity to a CDC. So if you're a group that has 3, 4, 5 restaurants, or maybe 10, you know that you're only as good as your weakest link. And if you can't make sure that you keep the strong links where they are, those weak links are going to just show themselves that much quicker. So if you have a good leader, if you have somebody in your company that you see that is really worth investing in, a lot of groups are just giving equity, because what's better than that, right? You have ownership, but you don't have the risk, so to speak, and you feel like you're a part of something. You're no longer simply a pawn in the game. You feel like you can really, put down roots somewhere and grow.
I still think it's not an intrinsic motivation, because again, you're still paying them, whether you're paying them in cash or you're paying them in equity. You're paying these, and I think it's funny. I learned this from Dan Simons when we were chatting. That really sort of spoke to me. He's the founder of this restaurant group called Founding Farmers.
Okay,
and it made me think about the kitchen. We think about upward mobility, right? Okay, you're going to be a line cook, and then maybe you're a tournat, and then you're a sous chef, and then you're a chef cuisine. But that's limiting unless I keep growing more restaurants. But there's this notion that we probably don't think about a lot in terms of horizontal mobility. Why would you want to stay in that station longer? Why would you want to spend way more time as a line cook? Because you can learn so much more and you can get so much better at it. And then, of course, yes, you can work your way up to a sous chef or a chef de cuisine, but maybe we want to spin off a CPG. Maybe we want to do sort of pop-ups at a market. Maybe there's other parts of a business we can actually expand revenue to, and you can do other things and give them sort of ways to sort of get involved. Because I think ultimately, I don't think humans are motivated by money at the end of the day. I think they're motivated by having purpose and having meaning and having impact. And
a sense of belonging, I think, also is really important.
Yeah.
Creating a sense of belonging in your kitchen for your team is about as strong as a bond you're going to be able to make, because we're social creatures. We want to feel like we're part of a pack. That's why gangs are so attractive to, individuals that don't come from anything, right? Because maybe they don't have good father figures, maybe they don't have good families, good family dynamics. Well, they go to a gang and they feel like that brotherhood that they never had, or that family they never had. And that's why they exist, right? And if you look at our industry historically has been made up of broken toys, right? Whether it's somebody that, is a felon that needs a job and you need a body, you hire them. Historically, it was low man on the totem pole, so to speak, that would take these positions because there's a very low barrier of entry to be able to be a cook, right? Now, if you're talking about a certain restaurant, 3 Michelin star restaurant, 2 Michelin stars, like that, okay, we're talking about a little bit different. But the vast majority of people who work in our industry are not educated. They didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I want to be a chef. I want to be a cook. No, it's a means to an end. And, if you can motivate people by saying, look to the right, look to your left, this is your family. These are your people. Do what's right for them, and you'll be rewarded with this, this nurturing environment. I think, if you can create that sense of belonging in your kitchen or in your restaurant, it's so powerful, right? Because it gives people purpose. It answers the question, why, right? Why am I doing this? Why do I want to put all this effort in? What is my why? What is that? And if you can answer that why, like why we're here, well, we're here to serve guests, right? Okay, we're here to make money. Like those things are obvious, right? If you can drill down a layer or two and say, okay, you're here because, Sam on your right and Joe on your left, like you care about them and they care about you, and they care about the environment because that's their safe area. That's their happy place. So if you can create that sense of belonging, and that's different ways, like you mentioned, horizontal mobility, if maybe that's doing fun things like a pop-up, allowing your cooks to, have a night where they create menu items, just like chefs that would be like, all right, tonight's a slow night. We're going to play Iron Chef. The secret ingredient is X, everybody gets an hour and they get to like put together a dish, and then the chef, the chef would judge it, so to speak. And, those type of activities and keeping it fresh and keeping it light, those little tiny things, they go a really long way. And I think it's just about being creative. And I think the more creative and genuine you can be, the more successful you're going to be as a chef and an owner.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, man. I appreciate that. Well, we did go on a rabbit hole, which I had a feeling we would. And I'm going to steer us into another direction
Correct the ship.
No, it's not a correction. I love that we chatted about it.
Right the ship.
And we could probably spend hours about more of that and why family meal is important and things like that.
Well, I think I'll leave with this subject, but I think if anybody out there wants to learn more about like the sense of belonging, the culture and all that, a great book is an author named Daniel Coyle wrote a book called The Culture Code, and where he studied high functioning groups like Navy SEALs, Danny Meyer, the Union Square Hospitality group they're in there, really high functioning groups that could have honest and genuine conversations with each other and be able to say, you know what, you didn't do that well tonight, Joe, and that hurt me. And then Joe would be like, okay, I'm sorry. I realized I should have picked up that fish quicker or whatever it is. But if you can create that trust in your kitchen where everybody knows that there was a role, and that's something that Daniel Coyle explains really, really well in the book, like it makes a huge difference. And that sense of belonging and everything else that goes along with it. So if anybody wants a really good read and learn more about it, I definitely recommend that book.
Yeah, love it. I just made a note about that. We'll put that in the show notes. Okay, so you were talking about meaning while you're in the kitchen. Sort of thinking about this conversation, I thought about one of my favorite books, which is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've read it. The general premise, Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor. It is a dark book. It is a pretty detailed book about the Holocaust and what he and so many others went through. But the general premise of it is actually really bright in that his notion is we find meaning through suffering as humans. And it is the direct way to find meaning, because through suffering, you find the opposite of it. And I thought of that because I have to imagine, have such a different and deeper perspective now on why you do what you do. So if you don't mind for a minute, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the accident and what was going through your mind right when it happened. And then maybe a little bit about like how you got through it. I'm sure your son had to have a big part in that.
Yeah, I think, and it was May 12th, 2015, we're almost on the 8th year anniversary now. And, it was like any other day, so to speak. I was living in New York at the time. We just signed the lease on the New York spot in the meatpacking district for the next high street. Let's see, that was March. The accident was in May. So within 3 months of signing the lease, we really hadn't even started a demo or anything. I was injured. So I was on an Amtrak train heading to New York City, like 9 o'clock at night after work, and it derailed. The engineer drove the train into a 55-mile-an-hour rated corner at 108 miles an hour. And the majority of the train, at least the first 4 or 5 cars, were derailed. And it was a massive, massive accident, like on a scale that few see. There's over 200 people injured, 8 people died, countless people like critically injured. I suffered a spinal cord injury on my neck when the train derailed. I was on the left side of the train. It derailed off to the right side of the track. I was facing forward. And what happened was, as the train tilted off the track, I was propelled in the air. My body turned like, I'd say 45 degrees, 90 degrees. My neck hit square against my back of my neck, hit square against the luggage rack on the opposite side of the train. And it immediately smashed my vertebrae, and cut off communication from my brain to my body, essentially. And fell down. It was dark. Everything was on top of me. I couldn't move. I immediately assumed that I was paralyzed just because of the way my neck hit. I couldn't move my body anymore. I could barely speak. My diaphragm, the diaphragm muscle, which is an important muscle for speaking, was wiped out. So I couldn't even hardly yell for help. Luckily, there was a few people in the car. There's like 15 people in the car that I was in. And, I remember them saying distinctly, like, ma'am, we hear you. We're going to get help for you. We can't see you. And I was like, well, I'm not a ma'am, first of all, but my voice was so high pitched and it sounded like probably like an old lady, so to speak. So, they pull me out and they have a triage section. It must have been like 45 minutes or so before somebody came to me.
Do you remember the first thing that you thought as soon as you hit the luggage rack, you fell down? Do you have a memory of like what first went through your mind?
Yeah, for sure. So really the first thing that was through my mind was, I'm not dead. Because when I was flying through the air, I had the thought that this is it. And my life was over. And so when my neck hit the luggage rack, you remember in Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox in the beginning where he's has a guitar and he has that giant wall speaker and he's like turns it up to like 10 and he hits the chords and it like blows him 20 feet back. Well, that's what it sounded like in my body when my neck hit that. It was like this crazy screeching sound feeling that went through my body just for a second, like somebody had just like strummed really hard on the chords of a guitar. And when I was actually laying on the windows because the car was on its side. I remember immediately smelling the smells of like oil and the smells of like the track essentially because you're kind of laying off to the side of a train track. So, and then immediately it goes into, okay, am I injured more than what I know? Because okay, I can't move my body. And my feeling, I still have some feeling in my body, but it's not 100%. I'm like, okay, am I bleeding out? And, I mean, I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't know if I had major injuries in my body. So, and then of course goes to the family, right? So immediately you're thinking, okay, my son's not going to have a dad potentially. Like, okay, if I am paralyzed, what does that mean to my future? Immediately you think of as much as I love being a dad, I love being a chef as much, or sometimes probably even more, and my trajectory as a chef had just started to really take off. I put a lot of time and a lot of effort in. I was not an executive chef until I was 34 years old, which doesn't sound that old, but when you think about, a lot of people were at that time becoming chefs at 28 years old, 29 years old and doing really well, where, like I said, I was like kind of a late bloomer when it came to fine dining. So, all that work, all the effort And now I'm just like, okay, I don't even know if I'm going to make it through the night. So all the thoughts that people say, I wouldn't say my life flashed in front of my eyes, so to speak, because I didn't have time for that. But it was definitely a moment where you're laying there and you're thinking about, if I am paralyzed, what does that mean for my future?
Yeah. So your first thought was, I'm not dead. And then
I'm not dead.
Is my son going to be okay? And then what's going to happen to my career? What's going to happen to this, what I love? I mean, probably knowing with a high percentage that that's what you had before is gone. I have to imagine that I know you were in the hospital for 6 months before you got out. And I can only imagine, I've heard you talk about a little bit that it's dark for quite a while, right?
For sure.
Having children, I can completely relate to like the kids being the thing that keep you going, right? Because we have this responsibility, and whenever anything is going wrong, and we have like these dark thoughts, knowing that there's someone that relies on you, not just financially and not just companion, but like you're their dad. That's such a blessing in a way to keep us going.
I was going through a lot. Not only did I lose my career, so to speak, or at least as I knew it. I was the owner at that point, so it wasn't like I didn't lose my job. We had 4 restaurants at that point, and I was a partner in all of them. And so I did have some financial security there, which was great. A lot of people wouldn't have that. And I knew that I'm adaptable. I knew that I can figure out how to, still find a role, right? My partner, Ellen Yin, within a week after I got injured, after I got out of the ICU, we were in the middle of designing a restaurant. So that didn't stop. We made the commitment, like, we're going to keep this going. In hindsight, it ended up being a really difficult project in New York, and it took a lot of resources. And in the end, maybe we shouldn't have done that. But, that also gave me purpose, because I could concentrate on something other than just my recovery, just my family situation. Because at the same time, my marriage was falling apart quickly after I got injured. And so it was like this double whammy of not really feeling like I had a place anymore in the world. Even though I knew this restaurant was coming, it was still almost a year later that we opened it. So there was a lot of time there. And, I really just had to latch on to like being a father and being a dad as much as I could be, even though I was going through this really tumultuous separation with my wife. And, there's a lot of threats of, whether or not I'm going to see my kid. And, so it really made me dig deep and took a lot of resources. And, in the end, we're good. I have him basically 50% of the time, which is how it should be. And, but at the time it was just chaos. And, I went to very dark places, and whether if this life is worth living. And in a lot of ways it wasn't anymore, except the fact that I, had this restaurant come online, and more importantly, my kid. And that sense of purpose was stronger than the other option, thankfully. And I think going to those dark places sometimes is too easy. I would say, I think in a lot of ways, I regret allowing myself to go to that place. I hold myself to a pretty high standard in general. And even though a lot of people will say you're very brave and you're an inspiration and all of those things, for me, it was just really about managing my abilities in the best way possible, because, and still relying on the things that I could still do. I can still be a leader. I can still be a coach. I can still do a lot of the things that I enjoyed as a chef, but I'm not going to be able to sit there at the pass at night, plating dishes and watching, the guests enjoy their food. That was really the hardest thing for me. And there's still a hole there. That hole will never, ever go away. Where at the time I got injured in 2015, it was 3 years after I came down to Philly, roughly, from New York. We did some great things. Our company was really, kind of hitting that hockey stick, putting a lot of time and effort. And, if you're plotting on a graph, and then all of a sudden all that time and effort pays off, and all of a sudden your value or your company's value or whatever it is really start to skyrocket. And we were hitting that. And I feel like, I tell people like, it felt like getting kneecapped, so to speak, and having to start over. When you're quadriplegic, and that refers to somebody who has any level of any deficit in all four limbs. And, but when you're quadriplegic, it's really, you're kind of learning how to live again. It almost takes you back to your infancy as a human, because you're completely reliant. I couldn't feed myself when I got hurt. I couldn't hardly move my arms. Now I have a lot more mobility than I did just from, working on it and all that. Still in a wheelchair, but I'm a lot more independent than I was when I first got injured.
Yeah.
You're having people brush your teeth for you, wipe your ass. Like, it's everything, it's every little thing. You're basically an infant, but you have the mind of an adult. So that's where it's really hard to figure that out. It's you have to rely on people. There's no option. You will die if you don't. Like, if I don't have somebody to help me throughout the day, I would not survive. Like, that's reality.
Hearing you talk about this, Eli, it's obvious there's been a lot of reflection and a lot of acceptance, and
right.
You're still handling all of it, I'm sure, on a day-to-day basis. But mental health is something that so many people struggle with. And I'm sure that you have had a tremendous life lesson in learning how to, manage mental health. And I think as humans in general, when we lose something that we had, or that we don't have control over, or we don't have something, or, we just know that we can't have it, or that loss, creates this trauma. And, we've all had it. We've all gotten to these dark places. I remember when I opened my first restaurant, Bark, I don't talk about this much, but I was really depressed. Because I left the fine dining world that I spent 12 plus years, mastering and becoming, as best as a cook as I could. And then I don't even know how I got to it, but I ended up opening a fast casual restaurant. And every night I would go to bed, like, upset that why am I doing this? And this is sort of an internal thing. This is not, an external catalyst. This is me, something that I did. And always wondering, like,
did it feel like you weren't living up to your own expectations?
Yeah, exactly. And then seeing my friends and colleagues that I worked with for the last 10, 12 years going and opening things and feeling like, God, I threw it all away. And yours, like others, I could never know what it's like to lose functions in my body. But like yours was just an external catalyst, right? Like you didn't even have any control over it. One, I wonder how those impact, like something that like you have just no control over, something that happens to you. And then, I'd love to just like get a sense, if you can, of like what helped you get through, like I know obviously your son had to be an influence on like saying, hey, dude, fucking move on, man. Like you gotta push through this, because you have a son, and I gotta take care of you. But do you recall, any instance where that was like the turning point of that dark time where you're like, this is not worth it. Why am I even doing this? To like waking up and being like, no, I'm here.
No, for sure. There was definitely kind of a line I drew in the sand, and going back to, anytime someone has a traumatic experience, that could be your girlfriend left you, right? But you had these songs that were your songs. And every time you hear them, it tugs at your heartstrings, and you feel bad, and you miss that. And, it just takes time to get over it, right? It's exposure therapy that, eventually if you hear that song 10 years later, you're not thinking about that, right? So, with something like spinal cord injury, you have to grieve every little detail of things you used to be able to do or things you wanted to do. A good example of that is being a father. And I love sports, right? I really look forward to being able to throw the ball with my kid, do batting practice with him, shoot the ball, teach him the techniques, like all these things that a father is supposed to do, right? Like I was excited about those things. I love playing golf, even though I wasn't good at it, but because in our industry, like who has time to play golf, right? But I would play it once or twice a year. I really loved it. But in my head, I had my retirement plan worked out. Like I'm going to work my ass up and get to a place where I can go play golf once or twice a week if I want to, and like, these were like the goals that you have in your mind that maybe you're not telling people, but these are things that you look forward to someday. And the very wise, but overused statement, yesterday's gone, tomorrow's not promised, today's a gift. And it's reality. Like any one of us can walk outside of our door today and get hit by a garbage truck. Like, that's just reality. Like, we know that those dangers exist. Do we think about them all the time? No. Like, who's going to, like, you're never going to leave your house if you think about all the threats. And there are people that don't leave their house because they do think of all the threats. And you can only protect yourself as much as you can. When I got hurt, it wasn't because I was drinking. I drove a car into a tree. This was somebody else's mistake. And I think what human nature does is that you want to have a reason, right? So you want to find a reason that happened. Even if you had no control over it, you're like, okay, well, maybe if I would have, stayed later and taken the later train like I usually did, I would not have got injured. Okay, maybe if I didn't come to Philadelphia that day because I came down specifically to cook for this group of women who had requested that I do a lunch for them. There's this group of incredibly successful women here in Philadelphia, and I want to do something nice for them. And I wasn't planning on coming down that day. So it was like, okay, if I didn't agree to come down for that one meal, I'd still be walking today, right? So your brain is like battling this desire to put a bow on it, so to speak, and give you exact reason why. But reality of it is there was no reason. Like, the guy just made a mistake. He didn't do it intentionally. He was distracted. He was driving a train, and he was distracted by some other things that happened on a different track, and he just lost his bearings. And he thought he was on a straight stretch, and he excelled, and he wasn't. And so, being able to grieve all of these things, now when I go to a park and I see a father, playing catch with their son, I don't grieve that as much. I might still notice it, you know what I mean? But I also know that I still can do a lot with my kid I couldn't see before, right? I can still teach them a proper swing when we're doing batting practice. Maybe somebody else has to throw the ball, but I can still do that, right? I can still teach them the way to hold a knife in the kitchen, even though I'm not physically the one showing him. I can explain to him the process of cooking, or braising a pork shoulder.
Yeah.
There's still things I can do that I couldn't see before. And when you go into this process, and every day's a learning experiment, right? So every day you're saying, okay, I couldn't do this before, now I can do it. And eventually you get to a point where you maybe max out on those things, but at least you have a good idea of what you can and can't do still.
Was there something that clicked for you, like turned the corner from, fuck, I can't do this, I can't do that, I don't have this, to like, you know what, but I have this?
Yeah, that's what it was. I think for the first 18 months, it was like, woe's me. Like, look how bad I have my life, how shitty my life is, and feeling sorry for myself. And I had a really important person in my life, and her name is Angela Riccobono. And she is the head counselor, psychologist for Mount Sinai rehab. And rehab medicine is different than regular medicine, right? So rehab medicine is not about healing somebody or getting them, make them feel better, curing cancer or something like that. Rehab medicine is about making their lives better with what they got. And Angela has been at Mount Sinai for 20 plus years now. She's helped countless people be able to see the forest through the trees, be able to paint the picture like it's going to be okay. And the rule of thumb is that 5 years is really how much time you should give yourself to figure your life out after you get injured. And, for her to be able to paint that picture for me, give me the confidence to really fight for my kid, fight for my way of life, and really inspire me to do that. Like, if it wasn't for her, I don't know where I would be today. It's hard to say.
Was there something particular that you remember that she said to you that really stuck?
You know what it is? She gave examples, and a lot of times words don't mean shit. And her to show me a picture, right? And say, look at this kid. He was 18 years old, when he got injured. Now he's married and he has 3 kids and he's thriving. He's a thriving attorney, and he did all this after he got injured. Those type of examples where I saw that, okay, if I do these things, if I work on my mental state, if I work on my ability to be grateful for what I have, if I, all these little details, then maybe I can have that someday. And the problem was through this recovery process is that I still I had lost my sense of purpose. And even though I could still do these things in the kitchen, we know being a chef is really physical. And, you can explain everything you want, but to show somebody like it eliminates about 1,000 words, right? So for example, it's so frustrating. Like, so if I'm cooking at home and I have somebody helping me, I'm like, all right, hold the orange this way. Okay, you're gonna cut off both ends, and you're gonna make supreme. So you're gonna take off all the peel. Like try to do that. Try to explain that to somebody without showing them. They'll be holding the knife upside down. They'll be holding it backwards.
Yeah.
You're like, what the hell? Like, no, like hold it this way. And they're like, well, I am going that way. I thought that's what you meant. It's really, really difficult. So having to find ways to still have a purpose was really important for me. And that's really what I was searching for, and something to fill that void. And I guess that's kind of how I found podcasting in a sense, because I think a lot of times, and you probably felt the same way when you left fine dining, is that you lose a connection with not only the restaurant and the food and that culture, but you're also losing a connection with your fellow chefs that used to be sort of a certain level with, right? And now you're not going to events, you're not jumping in, just popping in their kitchens to say hello anymore. I lost a lot of those relationships. And I think that was a really big thing for me. And that really, that void was really hard to fill. And I think as a chef, you're always striving to be relevant, right? Like a good chef, like you're not looking for accolades, you're not looking for notoriety, so to speak, but you want to stay relevant in your field. And I think that goes for anyone who has ambition. And for me, I wasn't relevant anymore. That was really hard for me because I worked really hard to become relevant and to become somebody who made a difference in the industry that I love so much. I'm in love with the industry. I really am, and to not be able to do that, not be able to perform on a nightly basis was huge. And so after about the 18th month mark, I made a decision, like I have to fight. Like I had to fight for everything. I had to fight for my kid. I had to fight for my life. I had to fight for every little thing. And that really gave me the motivation to start thinking, okay, what do I need to do to get better, like mentally? And, fast forward 8 years later, and I think it really was that 5-year mark that Angela used to talk about, that I was able to say, okay, I've done everything that I hoped I could have up to this point, and I feel really good about it. And, when podcasting found me, that was really an opportunity to reconnect with the industry. That's really what it was. It was a very selfish decision. I can talk, That's one thing I can do still. I can surmise about the industry and what we think is going to happen. We can talk about what has happened. And, for me, reconnecting with those chefs and be able to talk with them about their journeys, and just like we're doing here, is really special. I felt very fortunate that I was able to do that. And, fast forward to today, I have 2 different podcasts, and, it's keeping me really busy and connected to the industry. And we're doing events with the podcast and be able to expand the, beyond just the radio waves, so to speak, and, meet people who are listeners and do events that are focused around nonprofits and things like that. So it's really filled. I have to stay busy. Like that's really important for me. I have to be busy. And if I'm not busy, I don't feel like I'm relevant. So if I'm busy and there's things going on, and then I feel more relevant. But if I'm not busy, it's really hard.
Yeah, that's probably part of the chef in you as well.
Exactly.
I mean, it is really incredible, the things that you've been able to accomplish, even though you went through all this. I'm sure the podcast was also a big help.
Yeah, for sure.
I have this list I've been keeping for about 20 years. And every time something bad happens, I write it on there, but I write the opposite.
Oh, yeah.
So like I got shingles. It sucked. It was terrible. And so I'll write on there, I don't have shingles anymore. I used to get really bad canker sores. I would say, I don't have a canker sore today. Or I used to get terrible migraines. I don't have a migraine. Every time something, I'm in love. If I was struggling to find love. And I added a list. And so I keep it. I still have it. It's digital now, although I kept the paper.
So do you have that in the Mies app? you have that list, the grateful list, I guess.
What it is for me is it's a way for me to always have the perspective of, what, there's always something good today, right? No matter what, there was something bad that happened to me, or there's something that I suffered through, or someone else did, and that's not happening right now. Even if something else is, I can't imagine equating that to something as traumatic as you went through, but. I think we all have to find these ways to cope, and then to find ways to move on.
Yeah, for sure.
You talked about sort of starting the podcast so you can connect with the industry. I think about this a lot. I don't know if you do, but because I was a chef in fine dining, and then I started fast casual stuff, and then I went to this restaurant group as a chief operating officer. Now I'm in the tech world. But whenever someone asks me, what do you do? I always think chef first, no matter what. I think as chefs, and I don't know if that's just in every craft, but like no matter what we do, like after we have a cooking career or while we're still in the cooking career, chefs do other things as well. I think we all sort of like identify as chefs. At least for me, I'm curious for you. Like, do you still like first and foremost identify Eli Kulp as like chef?
Oh yeah.
Then podcaster. Oh, yeah. Then is that sort of something that crosses your mind a lot?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's still when you pour so much passion and love and effort into something, especially in your early 20s, and you're those really impressionable years where you're still developing parts of your brain, and you become hardwired to be something. And starting at 14 years old and working my way up through it, like there were hardwired habits, hardwired thought processes that I still, hold myself accountable for those things. And do I work as hard as I used to? No doubt about it. I don't have that stamina. There's no way I could do it if I wanted to, but there's still a lot of ways that I can put my effort forward that is still really rewarding. I think that's what it's all about. Like if you lose your job, if you lose your career, if you lose something in your life, it's really about, you have to grieve it, but then you have to replace it with something. If you don't replace it with something, I think that's where the danger is. And if you can replace it with someone or something, your heart gets broken. 6 months later, you find somebody else that you really love. You kind of heals that. And the same thing goes with going through a traumatic injury like this, a catastrophic injury, or just, going through something small. People always say, oh, you're such an inspiration. And honestly, I don't like that. I think that's because I don't feel like it. And I think just like anybody who you hear on the news, some guy runs to a burning house and saves 3 kids. Like, oh, you're a hero. And they're like, no, I'm just a regular guy. And it's really what it is. You're just a regular guy, but you showed up at that moment. And same thing for me. Like, I just was dealt a shitty card, and I just had to deal with it and kind of climb out of that hole where everybody has their struggle. And I don't care if it's you stub your toe today and your toe freaking hurts. That's a lot. Like, it's almost, even though it's stubbing your toe and breaking your neck is very different, there's still a lot of similarities in the sense, like, it's highly inconvenient. It's annoying. It can really get you down, and you have to dig your way out of it. So you can let that stub toe bother you all day, ruin your day, and not get shit done. Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to deal with this stub toe. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to still accomplish what I want to accomplish. And I think that's where I am today. I'm still figuring that out exactly and what that means, because I'm not a tech guy. Other than being interviewed on TV a couple of times, I'm not an audio guy. And, so I've had to just kind of fumble through it and find the way to make it work. And, up to this point, it's done that. And, I look forward to kind of the future of how this evolves, because some things that I could never have imagined happening after starting a podcast, that when I started it, that I would be doing a chef radio live event at a local charity, raising $35,000 in one night for a local charity. Like, those things would never, when I started podcasting, I could never have imagined that would be something that I would look forward to every year, doing this event. And it just shows that if you just keep moving forward, even if it's just an inch a day, whatever it is, eventually you're going to get to where you want to go. And it might not be as fast as you want or as linear as you want. It might be ups and downs, but if you're able to just kind of keep that fortitude, that resilience, you're going to be fine. And one thing that chefs are, we are resilient, because you have to be resilient. You have to be able to show up every day, even after a shitty service, and get back to the grind and prove that you're not a schlep, And that's, I think for me, it was holding myself accountable, and that chef mentality of, you have to go the extra mile to make yourself better.
Yeah.
To make your team better. And you have to go that little bit of extra effort that separates you from, everybody can get to 90% really easy. You know what I mean? I always say that, like a dish, for example, create a new dish, you can get to 90% really easy, but to get to 100% or 99%, that last 9% is really, really hard. And that's those are the details. That's the devil in the details, so to speak. And that's where I guess the way that I look at my life, and 90% is great, but can I get to 91%, 92%?
This podcast is brought to you by Mies, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mies is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmies.com. It's a gift and a curse when you, as an entrepreneur, I think it's sort of inevitable you have to be, hopefully, is that 90% makes us sick in the stomach. Like if I'm not constantly getting that last 0.1%, I would literally like get sick to my stomach, because the idea of that, you mentioned before, sort of that lake of mediocrity, that is, it's like the worst. And within our team, we like to embrace Kaizen, which is like this Japanese premise of like constant improvement. And I've always thought,
what was it? Sorry.
Kaizen is a Japanese sort of like framework of
Kaizen. Okay.
I bring up Kaizen, which I love because I think the idea of constantly iterating and improving, you can start on something at 90%, for example, and over the course of a year, if you keep working on it, you'll get to 99 point. You might not ever get to 100, but you constantly, and that's what the great part is actually the part of constantly improving and tweaking and learning and doing it again and doing it again. But you've mentioned this other premise that I didn't know much about, but I dug into a little bit after I heard it, of Ikigai. And I love it.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think Ikigai essentially meaning like everybody needs to find their purpose in life. And there's a sort of spectrum of, it reminds me of, there's a concept called the zone of genius, right? And so there's 4 zones, right? In terms of like what you do with your life. You have a zone of incompetence, which means doing things that you're not good at. And a zone of competence means doing things that you're just okay at. Zone of excellence, which is the most dangerous one, which is doing things that you are good at, even really good at, but don't love. And then there's the zone of genius, which is doing things that you're really good at and you really love. And Ikigai seems to be a very similar premise of finding the thing that you love to do, that you're very good at. And what is also interesting is that you can actually generate revenue from. And I think, when I think about your sort of like career and your path from cooking, becoming Food and Wine Best New Chef, to having this sort of life-changing experience that took a lot of that away, and then starting a podcast that has helped so many people. I'm curious how you think about your purpose in life today as opposed to, 10 years ago, and what's different, but then also what's the same, right? Like we all start, like you want to be the best chef in the world. You wanted to be like, have that sort of legacy of being an incredible chef. And now you have a different sort of objective maybe, but where's the crossover and why are you here today, man?
Yeah. Why are we here? That I can't tell you, but I can tell you like the concept of Ikigai and how that plays into your physiological self. It's not physical, it's not mental, it's just kind of this whole body high, so to speak, of when you do something and you love it. I immediately think of, these Japanese knife maker who's been doing, the same knives over and over, trying to reach perfection, even though he knows he'll never reach it. But it's constantly these 0.1%, 0.2% increases towards that perfection. And the Ikigai gives you that sense of purpose, and that sense of purpose fulfills your ability to live a purpose-driven life, one that's with fulfillment, and one that you can appreciate and be grateful for. And you mentioned the lake of mediocrity, and that was something that somehow I fathomed that in my head, or I must have read something one day where, I've seen so many chefs like who were brilliant, like that were so good, but they never got where they wanted to go because they couldn't put all the pieces together at the right time with the right purpose. And I never wanted to be that. I always want to get to that other side and feel like at the end of the day, there was a legacy that I left for the industry. And my little niche of the industry, I made better because of the work I did. Where now, I might not be feeding people physical food, but I'm able to feed them knowledge, wisdom, maybe some lessons that they would have to learn, have to go through if they didn't hear it from me or one of my guests in the first place, that navigate the challenges that are today that we didn't have yesterday. And also, I think what these podcasts do is that in kind of a maybe roundabout way, they do create a sense of belonging because chefs from California or Arizona or Ireland can dial into this podcast and they can see that their struggle is as real as the person that they're listening to. And they can say, okay, I'm not the only one. When you can find other people that are going through a similar struggle or hear similar stories that you've gone through, you're going through, it makes it feel that much more manageable, right? It's like if you have a rare disease, so to speak, and then you meet somebody else going through that rare disease, or for me, one of my biggest nemesis and the thing that can really hold me back physically is nerve pain, neuropathic pain. So when I find somebody else who has a similar level of injury, who also struggles with neuropathic pain, you feel like, okay, you're not in this alone. And whether or not you're interacting with them every day or you're interacting with them occasionally, it still allows you to feel that you're not the only one fighting that battle. And I think that's where, these podcasts come into play and people can hear, they can get a nugget of knowledge that they didn't quite think about when it comes to leadership or a dish or the style of cooking or a technique or scheduling or business, whatever it is that they took away, but also they can relate. And that relatability is a key factor in why people keep coming back to the podcast, I feel, because they do find that they can relate to other people and the struggles and the challenges that go into their day to day. So I think that now is maybe my Ikigai, so to speak. Will it be forever? I don't know. I don't know if it will or not. Will I be 60 years old doing chef podcasts? I don't know. I hope not. Honestly, I hope that I still dream of opening a restaurant that is truly mine again, just to prove it, right? It's almost just to prove to myself that I can do it. It's to prove to my kid that, what, it doesn't matter what life gives you, you can still find a way to reach the goals that you want to reach. Is that a dumb move? I don't know. Maybe it is dumb. Will I lose $1 million trying? I don't know, but I still mentally I want to try, but I also have to take into account, okay, I get to see my kid 4 days out of the week. That's really cool. I told him just the other day, like Sunday it was, 3 days ago, I said, Dylan, if I was still a chef, we would not be able to spend as much time together as we do. He goes, yeah, I know that. It would have been maybe the weekends, maybe every other weekend I would see him, be able to spend time. I wouldn't be able to go to his baseball games. I wouldn't be able to go to the soccer games. I wouldn't be able to be the father that I am today, where we spend at home or anywhere for those 3 or 4 days together. And I realize that, and I can really appreciate that fact. At the same time, though, it doesn't mean that I still don't want to do it to prove that I can still do it. And I would not be able to be the chef of a restaurant. That would be impossible. The way I envision, hopefully someday, if I had the opportunity, is really taking a chef, that's a generation behind me and helping them succeed and find their success through me and be able to coach and mentor as needed. But that's down the road. That's a dream. It's okay to have a dream. It's important to have dreams. Those are the things that keep you going and working towards them.
I don't see any reason why you're not going to do that. I'm pretty sure you will.
We'll see. It might be dumb. I mean, just owning a restaurant these days is hard. That's reality. It's not, we talked about in the beginning, your margins are so tight and you're kind of held hostage by the fact that there are circumstances that might be out of your control that might make or break your restaurant. And when your margins are so small, let's say you're operating on 5% margins, and every $1 million you were able to take home $50,000. You need a $3 million restaurant if you want to, have a nice car and a decent house and in a school district that your kids can thrive in, right? So now you're beholden to, okay, I have one $3 million restaurant. Well, I want to be able to buy a lake house. Okay, I'm going to open up another $3 million a year restaurant to pay for that. But the problem is, we know double the restaurants, double the problems. And that's just reality. So I'm trying to be very careful with my ambition, because sometimes my ambition will get the best of me. And I want to be smart if I ever was able to do something again that I could call not necessarily my own, but that within the company that I currently own or some other project, to do something that feels very personal again. I don't know if it's possible. It might be, maybe it is, but if it's not, I guess I'm okay with that too, because I have other ways to fulfill my desires, But I think in a perfect world, that's where I'll eventually land.
Yeah. Well, I'm just gonna throw out some positivity there and say it is possible, and I think you are going to do it. Just hearing you talk, I think what you're doing right now, I don't even know if you planned for it, but to your point of creating this sort of like community of chefs with the podcast, that is what helps. The number one prevention for mental health issues, depression, is community, is building a sense of like belonging. Yes. And that's just human nature. Obviously there's an incredible amount of studies that have proven this. And the more that you can do that, the more that you can create a sense of belonging, and you can help people. To your point, that the thing that sounds like helped you the most with Angela was seeing other examples of people going through what you're going through. That's human nature. The more that we see, oh, someone else did this, because guess what? Someone else did. There's billions of people on this planet. Someone else went through something very similar to another person. And if you can find that, there's so much power and help in it. So I love that you're doing that to help people.
Well, I mean, if you look at Maslow's theory of
hierarchy of needs,
right? So, you look at the very bottom level, it's just, creating income, essentially sustenance. So you can have shelter, right? You can have your basic needs met as a human being. And then as you work up that pyramid, you're able to put things in place. And at the top of that pyramid is happiness and fulfillment. And the reality of it is the vast majority of people on this planet will never get past that third level, that second or third level where, they have fulfillment. A lot of people will, majority of people will be born into a family that doesn't have a lot of money. They'll become whatever X, Y, or Z profession they want to be, that they can be. And, they're not going to have a high education. They're going to just be a worker bee. And then they're going to, someday, hopefully they can find happiness, but maybe they'll never find happiness, they'll never find fulfillment. So if you're able to find that, you're a very, very fortunate person.
Yeah.
I've had to realize, I've always struggled with this idea of happiness and fulfillment. I think as chefs, sometimes we're never fully fulfilled. We're always looking for the next high, right? It's almost like an addiction. We're looking for that next dish that's going to blow up, right? The next cronut, the next whatever it is that's going to, those moments of brilliance that you had in those unique dishes that really became you and your calling card in your restaurants, your signature dishes, right? Those type of things. And we're always chasing that high. And sometimes you don't need that. You realize that it goes back to you're talking about early as a chef, you're trying to prove things, right? You're trying to be the next Ferran Adria. You want to be the next David Boulay. Those are the things that you strive to be, because those are the examples that you're looking at as your sort of gods, right? In the industry. Well, maybe you don't become that, but maybe you become something unique and different in a way that is still fulfilling to you. That's what our industry is. I love about our industry, and it's so great, is because we have those opportunities, right? And like I said, the harder you work, the more opportunity you're going to have. Yogi Berra said it best. Harder I work, the luckier I get. And that flies in the face of luck. There's no, I don't feel like luck is something that exists in our industry, because sure, right place, right time, yada, 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 is Bobby Flay if he didn't, if he wasn't, one of the original Food Network people, those type of things. Of course, like there's those 1 in a million type situations where the fact of the matter is that no matter what you do, if you put in the effort, you work for the right people, you maintain the relationships with those people. I can honestly say I could go back to any job I ever had, any job I ever had, and I would get either that job back or I would be referred. You know what I mean? And that's something I'm really proud about. Even jobs that I left because it wasn't the right fit or it wasn't the right situation for me, I didn't leave it in a bad way, because our industry is so interconnected that I understand that it's, sometimes you have to swallow your pride and kind of get through it and move on to the next thing. And, going back to luck, it's just really about doing, I say this on my podcast all the time. Don't be lazy. Make sure you seek out the right people and work for those people. If it's not a good culture, if it's not a good leader you're working for, if you're not feeling that you're getting the most out of it, don't waste your time with it. Don't go chasing rainbows all the time. You know what I mean? Looking for the pot of gold. But don't waste your time working for mediocre people, because if you work for mediocre people, if you surround yourself with mediocre people, you will be mediocre. That's just reality.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. It's fun. It's funny you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I find this big flaw in just in the way that we think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously at the bottom you have food, shelter, water. That you
Right.
need these physiological things, and it's baseline. There are people who don't have that, and same goes for safety, right? Are you in a place where you're not going to get murdered?
Right, you're getting attacked by a lion.
After that, I think finding love and belonging, finding self-esteem, finding purpose, which is the top of our hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you find purpose, the majority of those things, and I want to be sensitive to, of course, like if you are born into poverty, there's things that you can't control, and that's
Sure.
that part is incredibly tough. But independent of that, like finding purpose is going to solve the rest of those things. You bring up, like, don't be lazy. I find that humans naturally are not lazy. They naturally, many of them do not have purpose, because if they had purpose, they would not be lazy, because purpose is what is going to bring you joy. It's going to make you want to get up and do the thing. Someone is referred to as lazy because of something that they're not doing at work or something, but maybe they are spending 20 hours playing video games. Okay. And maybe that's just a distraction. But when they find the thing that they love, they're going to do it, no matter who the human is. I don't care any human you find, but if you don't have purpose, and I bring this up because, as we're getting to the end here, for me, like the theme of the conversation today with you is around finding purpose and the importance of it, and making sure that you're checking in with yourself around what is your purpose and why are you doing what you're doing, because anything can change at any moment. As long as you push to make sure you know what's your purpose, why are you here, what do you really love, what do you love to do, you won't be lazy, and you won't stand for mediocrity. You won't stay at a job that's mediocre, because you have purpose and you want to go find and seek like more of it. And I think that's what is the hardest thing, right? By the way, it's not easy. We're very lucky. We started cooking when we were 14, and I love cooking more than anything else in the whole world. Holy shit, am I lucky that I got to just find the thing that I love, and I found purpose that young. That's not common, right? There are people that go through 15, 16 careers, if they're resilient enough to do that, before they find the thing. And that, I think we're lucky in that regard. That's our luck, right? And that is luck in that regard, right? Because we could have just not found that, but we did.
Well, I say if this woman never moved to the small town I grew up in to open a restaurant, I wouldn't be a chef. I know that for a fact I would not be a chef. There was nothing in my family. Restaurants weren't not a thing we did. We didn't have the money for it. We lived really rural, home cooked meals. We raised chickens for our eggs. We had ducks. I remember butchering chickens and cows. That we'd raise a cow every other year, and we'd stock our freezer up with that cow. Like that was, restaurant dining out. Like that was like McDonald's or the pizza place in the next biggest town that we had that had a pizza place. Like that was eating out for us, and that's the majority of people. So yes, like luck maybe has something to do with it, destiny, karma, like all these theories, God, whatever you believe in. If it's destiny, if it's not, the reality of it is that you either have it or you don't. And if you have that sense of purpose, like there's plenty of people that work really hard at their careers and they'll never be fulfilled. I think a lot of people, I've met people like a lawyer, right? Like I heard somebody the other day say, I'm a recovering lawyer. They worked incredibly hard to be successful. They had a practice, but the thing is they never loved it and they burned out, and then they had to find something else to fulfill that. And you're right. For us, we're very fortunate, blessed, whatever you want to call it, to be able to find that and to never struggle with that reality. And I think anybody in our industry or somebody who's listening to this outside of our industry, if that's a struggle that you have, the one thing that I can tell you that will help fix it might not fix it all the way, is action, right? And just doing it, just starting it, putting one foot in front of the other and working towards something that you need to explore. It's an exploration process that will get that. And if you're a curious human being, I think being curious is very important skill as a human. You're going to find that, and don't get sucked into scrolling on your phone every day, or, and don't do things that don't make you feel good. Right. And I think Instagram and these things, often people leave them. I do, a lot of times if I'm scrolling, I will feel less than when I started, because you're naturally comparing yourself to what you think other people's perfect life is. And we know it's not perfect, but we still see the pictures and our brains go there. And I want to be at the Caribbean. I want to be swinging off a swing under a waterfall in Hawaii. You know what I mean? But maybe that's just not where I am today, and that's what I have to deal with. And so just like anxiety, action is the number one killer of anxiety. If you have anxiety, just do it. Just start. You can't control negative prediction. These are all things that I've learned in therapy over the years. I still do therapy. I do it once a month. I still rely on that just to kind of reset my perspective every month. And for me, it's really about having somebody there that can help reset that perspective, because as it's human nature to allow your brain to kind of go places that it shouldn't. And, have an opportunity to reset that is really a big part of my mental stability. And I think also I'll just share this nugget this realization that I've had over the course of the last couple of years, is that I've always wondered what happiness is. Even when I was at like my peak and, things were going the right way, I never felt fully fulfilled. I never felt like I was fully happy. It was always something else, right, that I wanted. And that's a really big trap that people can fall in. But I've realized that for me, happiness really is something you have to put yourself in that state of mind. It's not something that happens, or at least not for me. I think everybody has their own relationship with what happiness is. But for me, I've realized that it's a frame of mind. It's a mindset that I have to put myself in order to be happy. It doesn't always naturally happen. If I'm having a really shitty day, like, sure, I'll accept that day. I'll be, all right, this day was a shitty day. Let's move on. Tomorrow's a new day. I'll wake up feeling better physically. And, when I have those hard physical days, I'm in a lot of pain, my spasticity and my muscles is tight. I don't even want to go in public in case I have a spasm. Those are really hard days. They're depressing, but own that, right? Like, okay, this is a shitty day. Tomorrow's not going to be shitty. I'm going to go into tomorrow assuming that's going to be great. If it's not another great day, so be it. Happiness is not a straight line. It is absolutely not a straight line. There's ups, downs, curves. And for me, happiness is just a mindset that I've had to develop. Maybe that's a self-preservation tool that I've had to come up with, but that's just the way I look at it. It's a mindset, and just being grateful. And, there's moments when you are in when you're down in the dumps, just framing that perspective and keep that perspective.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I this all is definitely revolving around the Ikigai concept that you're talking about. I find a divergence between luck and happiness, actually, because luck requires action. You have to go and do, otherwise you won't find luck. And happiness, I think, is the opposite, where, at least for me, it requires, the ability to accept that no action will create happiness. You have to accept yourself. And, we're talking about sort of how people spend their time and things like that. There are days, I don't know about you, I wish that I could be that person that could have a 9 to 5 and then go home and watch the game and go do the thing on the
as soon as you punch out, you're not thinking about it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just never been me ever. I don't know why. I spent a lot of time in therapy trying to figure out why do I keep doing these things. And to your point, I also like always thinking about like, okay, I know I love this. I know I love building businesses. I know I love having impact. I know I love cooking, but why am I doing this? What part of this is bringing me happiness? And, I'm 42 now. I think we're around the same age, and it's taken a very long time. And I still am working at it. But I think what I'm starting to realize is just accepting that like whatever you're doing is part of it, right? No matter what the
part of
whatever,
your journey.
Whatever the good or the bad, if you can just like, be okay with it with each day. Something good will happen, something bad will happen, and that's hard. It's almost like the antithesis of working at it. You have to actually not work at it and just let it be. And as a chef, as an entrepreneur, as someone, we are constantly like thinking about getting past the 90% that's contrary to happiness, right? Because you have to sort of figure out this way to reconcile this pursuit of excellence with this pursuit of happiness. And they are in competition with each other in so many ways, even though they're part of what makes us happy. And I think that, again, sort of wrapping this up of hearing you, I think that you're learning this through, sometimes we need something crazy in our life to help us sort of step back and say like, why am I doing this? What actually is making me happy?
Well, I mean, so often, right? Like you lose a loved one suddenly. Life is framed differently. A tragedy happens. All of a sudden people are really grateful for what they have. That's the struggle. Don't wait for those moments to frame your perspective. Wake up every day, allow yourself a little opportunity to reflect. It can be 2 minutes. Just reflect on what you've accomplished, what you've done, but also what you want to do and what you want to accomplish going forward. And if you can do that, just take a little bit of time every day to be grateful, show gratitude, whether it's towards yourself or to someone else, to something. Those little details, those little moments matter. And it's once people lose perspective, and this could go back to your business as well. If you lose a perspective of what you're there for, what you're doing, and why you're doing it, you're a ship without a mast, floating in an ocean of challenges. So if you're able to keep your own perspective, but then also keep the perspective of your restaurant, keep the perspective of your menu, the North Star, so to speak, what are you working towards every day? And if you keep a perspective mentally, personally, and professionally, it's a life changer. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, tying this into sort of our industry, even if you love cooking, right? And you're a cook now, and this goes basically for any craft, also any entrepreneur that's starting a business. I love Simon Sinek has a great book, Start With Why. And
exactly.
It really ties into this. Like you have to be really careful because you could be spending a lot of time, years can go by and you're growing into more as a chef, but you might forget why you started and what your specific individual purpose is in the industry that you're in or the endeavor that you're in. And that's when things can really start to go south, right? Because you don't know, you don't have a framework for making the decisions that you want to make. And you start to enjoy it less because you forget the reason why you started it. And so all the cooks out there and anybody starting a business or running a business or as a chef, like make sure you're checking in with yourself. Like why am I doing this? It'll probably make you better.
I think it's great. I mean, as human society develops, we're learning a lot more about how the brain works and how to manage that process that you go through on a daily basis of, you're battling depression or you're battling sadness, you're battling some challenge, but we know more about the brain than ever before. And we know that certain things work, not negatively predicting the future, not assuming the worst. When you do those things, your mind, even though it feels like, oh, you're just thinking it, but your body feels it, right? So if you're having those moments where, you are in the shits, mentally you're not there, it's so important to be able to say, you know what, I need to do things to get out of this. And if you can do those things to get out of it, my therapist always says, action is the number one killer of anxiety. Negatively predicting the outcome. If you negatively predict that you're going to walk outside and a bird's going to shit on your head, you're not going to go outside. You're not going to want to do that. But if you have the mentality that you're going to go outside and you're going to rock the day and you're going to enjoy it, there's a good chance that you're going to positively predict the future. So it's just those little brain things that you learn as you get older. That's what I like about these podcasts is that somebody listening to this, they might hear this for the first time. Like, oh, like I remember, okay, here's an example. When I was probably 30 years old, I was kind of lost, right? I felt like my prime was passing me. I was still a cook. I was a sous chef. I didn't know really where to go. I was in New York City, but I wasn't feeling like I was connecting to people. Yeah. And New York City can be a great place, but it can also be a very lonely place. I went to a Borders bookstore into the self-help section. There's the Borders down on Broadway and by Wall Street. And, I went to this self-help section and I remember opening a book and I'm reading about anxiety and the physiological response that your body has. I'm like, oh my God, I have anxiety. Like this was before anxiety was a thing. Nowadays it's talked about all the time. It's in pop culture, but back then there wasn't anybody, this wasn't discussed. This is going back 15, 16 years ago, probably. And, so when I was able to identify what I was going through, I was able to manage that better. I think that's what this is all about, because a lot of times as your adolescence get in your early 20s and, you're not thinking about that stuff because you're naturally happy, but then reality slaps you across the face and you're like, oh shit, I'm 26 years old now and I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what my purpose is. That's when you have to educate yourself and get a better grasp of how your brain works and be able to control that for a positive response.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was awesome, man. I love the premise of action.
I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, look, I think, there's a lot to talk about, but, I love the premise of action is prevention for anxiety. Comparison is a thief of joy. There's a lot of these things that I think are so obvious, but seem innocuous, but they aren't. And I'm glad we had a chance to talk about them, and I'm glad we spent more time talking about this than just about kitchens, cooking in the old days. Those things are incredible and we love them, but there's a lot more that we go through that I think you have an incredible perspective on. I'm glad we got to chat about it. But anything else you want to share with the audience or anything?
No, I mean, if they're curious, they want to check out, what I'm talking about in the podcast, feel free to Chef Radio Podcast. You can check that out. If you want to connect with me, it's Eli Kulp on Instagram. Feel free to reach out if any questions or, even along the lines things we talked about. I'm mentorship and coaching, that was really what, as a chef, that I loved. I still love that. And I know that that's one thing I can still make a difference in people's lives with. So I always appreciate if somebody's going through something, and no matter how small or big it is, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk through it with you.
All right. Well, the Chef Radio Podcast, Delicious City, Eli Kulp on Instagram.
Delicious City, Philly. If you want to know about the Philly food scene, it's another podcast I do. So yeah, it's all in good fun. So.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate it, man. This was great. And I think we'll be talking again soon anyway. So
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Eli.
You got it, bud.
Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.